This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel and the U.S. partner on a joint exercise simulating an attack on Iran's nuclear program. But could an attack succeed? And the rise of anti-Semitism, a sobering report on its rise in one nation. And CBN partners with Israeli organizations to help disabled young girls and Ukrainian Jews fleeing the war with Russia. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Israel and the U.S. are teaming up for a first-of-its-kind military cooperation on Israel's largest military drill ever. And it's all about striking Iran's nuclear facilities. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has more.
Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz stressed the importance of dealing with Iran prior to leaving for Washington to meet with American military leaders.
Iran continues to accumulate irreversible knowledge and experience in the development, research, production, and operation of advanced centrifuges. It stands just a few weeks away from accumulating fissile material that will be sufficient for a first bomb.
In Washington, Gantz met his U.S. counterpart, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and urged the U.S. to take the lead when it comes to Iran. According to a statement from his office, Gantz told Austin, "We must act decisively against Iran's mounting regional aggression in a variety of ways. This includes strengthening a practical coalition under U.S. leadership together with regional partners." This is all happening as Israel plans a large-scale military drill practicing a potential attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, Israeli media reports say. The incoming U.S. military commander in this region was also in Israel for the first time discussing the Iranian nuclear threat with Israeli military chiefs. Exercises are set to take place over the Mediterranean Sea as part of the ongoing Chariots of Fire military drill. The U.S. Air Force is also expected to take part in a move that many say sends a message to Iran.
I think what's historic is that the Biden administration is having America's military participate, specifically refueling Israeli jets, which is something very important.
Middle East expert Eli Kohanim says after more than a year of negotiating an updated Iran nuclear deal, it's time to consider military action against what she calls an axis of evil that includes China and Russia.
It's really time for the Biden administration to put this option back on the table and show this access that the United States will go to the military option if necessary. And we're going to continue to defend our own national security interests as well as our allies in the region.
Meanwhile, as sanctions continue to squeeze Iran, Kohanim says recent protests there go beyond economic woes.
They very quickly turned political with people in the streets of Iran at the threat of their own lives chanting death to Khamenei.
Kohanim says Iranians want their government to be concerned with the welfare of its citizens instead of trying to rule over others. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Israeli leaders insist they will not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. For years, the overshadowing question has been whether Israel would take preemptive action to cripple or destroy the regime's nuclear program. CBN News talked with one Israeli analyst who has studied the question for more than a decade. In 2012, Yaakov Katz, now the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, served as the paper's defense analyst. As co-author of Israel versus Iran, The Shadow War, he examined the potential for an attack on Iran's nuclear program.
It seemed at the time that Israel was capable of doing it. I distinctly remember one meeting that I was brought into at the Air Force headquarters in Tel Aviv with the top Air Force general who basically rolled out a map on a table and showed us how the Israeli Air Force squadrons would fly to Iran.
At the time, Israel prepared night and day.
The Air Force had been training extensively for this operation. Billions and billions of shekels had been poured in to this planning and to training and to buying up the munitions and the technology and the weapons that would be needed to take out some of the facilities.
Then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Ehud Barak tried but failed to convince the cabinet, army and security chiefs to take action.
In the end, that never happened. So that was the backdrop back in 2012. And it seemed real, it seemed viable, and it seemed like Israel had a real opportunity to cause enough damage to set back Iran's nuclear program.
Now, 10 years later, the problem and targets remain the same. Natanz, Iran's main uranium enrichment facility. Fordow, with thousands of centrifuges burrowed into a mountain. To the west, Iraq, where a heavy water plutonium facility is under construction. And further south, Iran's uranium conversion facility in Isfahan. Since this scenario hasn't changed in 10 years, what about Israel's military capability?
Israel today, Chris, is stronger than it was back in 2012, right? If back in 2012 we had F-15s and F-16s, those are fourth generation fighter jets that are detectable on radar. Today we have F-35s. These are the JSF, the Joint Strike Fighters, that have stealth-like capabilities that can basically go fly into an enemy airspace, not be detected, and can take out radar installations as well as surface-to-air missile systems, can basically pave the way for then the big heavy bombers, the F-15s and the F-16s, to come in and drop a ton of munitions all over these different facilities to destroy them.
The question a lot of people have been asking over and over again throughout the years, can Israel do it?
Well, I think it's a little more complicated today, Chris. I think that back in 2012, the feeling was that, yes, it could do it. Then Iran's nuclear program is not as advanced as it is today. It was not as heavily fortified as it is today. It was not as dispersed as it is today. With that said, even then, it would have been just causing enough damage to set them back for a period of time.
Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg laid out a number of top stories to look at in 2022. At the top of the list, an Israeli attack on Iran.
We've never had to do it before. We've always found a way through covert operations and all kinds of other shadow activities to keep Iran from getting the bomb without having to go to what's called a kinetic war, a full-on actual war.
Katz points out even if there were an attack, it wouldn't be the end of the story.
And I think that no one has any illusion to believe that if Israel attacks Iran, that's it. There's never going to be a nuclear program. No, there can be, because the Iranians have the domestic know-how, they have the technology, it's in their heads. And while you can destroy their facilities and infrastructure, you can't take away that knowledge.
Plus, any military move likely leads to a regional war, with Iran unleashing Hezbollah, its arm in Lebanon, to fire thousands of missiles into Israel.
That is not a war we want to be in. We might have to do it, but I mean, those stakes are just so high, and I think that's the far away the biggest story.
I think that Israel has means at its disposal. The question, though, comes down to, is it worth it? Is the damage that you will cause Iran's nuclear infrastructure going to be worth the war that will ensue, the international condemnations that you will almost definitely face from the world?
It's an age-old dilemma that now faces a new set of Israeli leaders.
I don't think Israel can live with a nuclear Iran, right? I think a nuclear Iran has the potential to pose an existential threat to the state of Israel. So it's not like I'm saying we should just sit back and let this happen. No, we have to do what we have to do, but we also have to realize that sometimes power has its limits. So it's complicated.
As Israeli military and political leaders increasingly warn about a looming attack, Rosenberg believes Israel's options are running out.
I don't hear it as hyperbolic. I don't hear it as trying to, be sensationalistic. I think Israeli leaders are realizing this is it. Iran has gone past all of the previous red lines that any Israeli government has ever said. But no Israeli prime minister wants to go to war.
The threat, sadly, is still there, and it needs to be dealt with. I would hope and pray that it can be dealt without the use of force, without the need for war and bloodshed. That is always the Israeli and Jewish preference, right? Is to be able to do this through peaceful means, through dialogue, through discussion, through a deal. But unfortunately, we are dealing with a murderous regime that has so much blood on its hands that it's only seeking and hungry for more. And that's why it needs to be stopped.
And another part of history also remains, as Katz points out, often the Jewish people stand alone.
That famous saying of Hillel the Elder, a Jewish scholar from the period of the Talmud from a couple thousand years ago, who said back in the time in Hebrew, "Eina nidli mili," which translates into English, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And what was true thousands of years ago for the Jewish people is still so true in the year 2022.
Coming up, an author's inside look at the rise of anti-Semitism and how you can combat one of the world's oldest hates. As anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world, author Tuvia Tenenbaum took an in-depth look at how one nation feels about the Jews, Great Britain. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl interviewed Tenenbaum recently about his new book, The Taming of the Jew. He openly filmed his talks with people, and a warning, some of the language may be offensive.
Tuvia Tenenbaum, you're a best-selling author. Welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you for having me, Julie. It's a pleasure to see you, as always, here in Jerusalem.
Now, you've written a new book, your latest book, The Taming of the Jew.
Correct.
Tell me, what is behind this title, and what is this book about?
My publisher asked me, which place would you like to be your fifth book about? So being that I am also a theater person, and so I said, I would like to go to Britain because I love English theater. I said, let's do something, a book about theater, about funny things, about entertainment, about a little politics, about nothing Jewish. You know, there are only about maximum 300,000 Jews in all the UK, so it's nothing. But it didn't happen like that. Sadly, from the first day I arrived and I started interviewing people, I heard the most horrible anti-Semitic trash.
Like what?
Like, for example, I went to a bar during the day and everybody was nice and they were sitting and talking and explaining to me how much they care about Palestine. And when I asked them why, the answer was because of the Jews. You have a lot of Palestinian flags here. Yeah? Why is that? Because we support them. Why do you support the Palestinians?
Hitler didn't kill enough Jews. They're scourge of the world.
What do you think is behind that?
Anti-Semitism, as I found out. Mm-hmm. And I walked around every time when I wanted to talk about other issues. And I went to people and I asked them simple questions. Like, is there something, Julie, that bothers you? That you would like to change in the world? Their answer was, one after one, almost, the majority, free Palestine.
Free Palestine. Do you think they understood what they were saying?
They understand one thing.
Yeah.
They don't even know where Palestine is on the map. But what they do know is that on the other side of Palestine, the enemy of the Palestinian in their mind is the Jews. And the story is there was once upon a time a land called Palestine, a country, a state called Palestine, that existed for God knows how many years. And for no reason, Jews came in flying, killed the Palestinians and took over the land. Oh, wow. And ever since then, they killed them day and night.
Wow, that's quite a story.
That's what the people think.
Every kind of person, poor,
rich, poor, young, old, educated, not educated, it doesn't matter.
The Church of Scotland, also, I guess, nearly 10 years ago, they came out with a document that caused an uproar. As long as Zionists think that Jewish people are serving God's special purpose and that abuses by the state of Israel don't invalidate the Zionist project, they will believe themselves more entitled to the land than the Palestinian people. The promise to Abraham about land is fulfilled through the impact of Jesus, not by restoration of land to the Jewish people. Now, I understand that you also spoke with officials. Did they refute this at all? Did they repent for this at all?
Okay, the document is called The Inheritance of Abraham, which was issued by the clergy in the Church of Scotland quite a few years ago. And to this day, they did not go away from it. And the idea was two main ideas to make it in simple English. One thing is that biblically speaking, the Jews are not special people. And the other thing is that the state of Israel, biblically speaking, does not belong to the Jews. That's the idea.
And the Israelis really like your book.
Yeah, this was a number one, it's like number one ebook in Israel. It was like amazing.
Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
Up next, see how these young girls are finding independence for a new life and a new future. Independent living can be a challenge for young adults with disabilities. CBN is working with one Israeli organization to make it possible for young women to build their future. These 6 young women live together in this newly furnished apartment, providing a lifestyle balancing independent living with guided supervision.
In the flat, I love with my friends. This feel better with my friends. I love my friends so much. I feel happy. This makes for me love.
I feel in my heart that it's fun to live in the apartment. My heart is connected to the apartment.
The residents greeted board members and supporters of Shalva during this open house, a celebration of their new lifestyle made possible through a partnership of the Shalva National Center and CBN.
The relationship we've had with CBN over the years has been extraordinary.
Shalva founder Rabbi Kalman Samuels thanks CBN for its partnership.
What I think is important is that CBN has now decided to support Shalva financially. They have given you wonderful people in the States and all over the world have donated, and CBN is using it effectively. In this case, we have furnished a new apartment for our young adults, which is qualitatively different than most other apartments. Inclusive living in the community and change of life for each and every one of these youngsters, and equally so for their families.
Samuels added the relationship is based on biblical values.
It's very important in terms of the shared values we share with CBN viewers at the core of our values and the values of the prophets.
The Shalva National Center is one of the largest and most advanced centers of its kind. It's dedicated to providing quality care to disabled individuals and their families.
Jerusalem is the center of so much social innovation, but perhaps the thing that I'm most proud of is that Jerusalem is where Shalva set up its home, because Shalva is a light not just to the country, but is a light to the world of knowledge, of caring, of seeing people for who they are and not their disability first.
CBN's development manager, Danny Kopp, represented CBN partners.
We get to partner with amazing organizations, but Shalva just stands out in how it embodies these values of not just care for people, but for seeing the vision of them flourishing. Because we were all created equally in the eyes of God. We all have the right, we deserve to be able to flourish no matter what conditions we live in. You embody that and you facilitate that, you make it possible, and what you see here is beautiful.
During the day, residents work at Shalva, then come home to this apartment. They share responsibilities such as caring for the home, along with the staff members overseeing them. It gives them and their families a new future.
It's the reasons that we do it. As we now have beautiful people who are productive members of society and bless us all with their passion and their grace and their smiles. Thank you again to Christian Broadcasting Network for your generous donation and support of this important organization that is affecting all of our children, all of their families, and all of the world. So thank you.
Up next, CBN partners with an historic Jewish organization to bring Ukrainian Jewish refugees escaping to a new life here in Israel. Among the millions of refugees who fled Ukraine are thousands of Jews seeking a new life in Israel. CBN Israel partnered with the Jewish Agency to help many of these refugees resettle in the Jewish state. CBN's Ashley Key was here at the airport to greet one batch of new arrivals.
Millions of lives have been changed forever. Families have been ripped apart, homes have been destroyed, and a country once rich in beauty and peace lies in ruins. As the war in Ukraine rages on, CBN was able to partner with the Jewish Agency in Israel, supporting thousands of Ukrainian Jewish refugees fleeing their country. I had the privilege of experiencing this life-changing work firsthand.
I'm standing on the tarmac at the Ben Gurion International Airport in Tel Aviv, Israel. And as you see right behind me is a flight fully funded by CBN Israel, helping Jewish Ukrainians seek refuge from the ongoing war in their homeland.
They lost everything. And so many of the people that came here today, I don't know if you noticed all the women with babies and no fathers. The fathers had to stay behind. They're protecting their country.
Shalom, shalom, shalom.
Despite the ongoing restlessness and an uncertain future for so many, CBN, with the help of the Jewish Agency, is able to provide emergency transportation, shelter, and evacuation.
People are tired, but they have hope. They have joy. We have rescued over 12,000 people, helping them cross the border. And we are here to help and give those children and those families a new start in Israel, and hoping and praying, God willing, that their fathers will soon join them.
It smells good. The air is pretty.
What is your hope for Israel?
To have an easy and fast adaptation, to find my way in this country and learn the language.
CBN Israel will continue to support the thousands of Ukrainian Jewish refugees desperately seeking a better life for themselves and their families.
And this would not be possible without our CBN partners. So right now, we want to take this time in this moment to say thank you. Thank you for your heart for Israel. Thank you for your compassion. And thank you for taking action and helping the Ukrainian people in need.
Well, please continue to pray for these Ukrainian Jews as they make their new life here in Israel. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blasts so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.